Well, welcome. Y'all ready to get into it? You ready? It's going to be a cool morning. I'm excited about this. It's interesting. One of the tasks that companies, they spend a lot of money on and they work really, really hard for is to come up with a memorable and compelling logo. We're all familiar with this, right? It's that little, it's the little image that represents the company's identity, and it really communicates, hey, this is who we are, this is what we're about, this is what we're going to look like, this is how people are going to know who we are, and it's this logo, and the most successful logos, or the most successful companies are the ones that we all know, right? So I'm going to play a little game with you. It's not rocket science, just play along with me. I'm going to throw some logos up on the screen, and y'all just tell me what that is, okay? So I think this is the first logo. What is that? Who's that for? Nike, right? Nike. Just do it, baby. That's right. Just do it. And y'all know what that's called, though? It's not a check. It's a swoosh. It's a swoosh. That's right. It's a swoosh. And the word Nike actually comes from the Greek word that means victory. And, you know, this is kind of like a stylized representation of the winged goddess of victory. And so Nike, you know, it's all about success. It's all about success. And if you wear a pair of Nikes, you're going to be successful, and you're going to, you know, win the race or whatever. I don't know, but that's what it means, right? You're going to be successful. You got the victory. All right, so here's another one. I bet we all get this one too. Who's that? Yeah, that was pretty duh, right? That's pretty easy. Apple, right? Apple. And the old legend is that they actually got this from the biblical story of creation, the apple, that it's about knowledge, right? And Apple puts technology in our hands, and we use technology differently now. Like the iPhone is like the coolest thing ever. Oh my gosh, or you got an iPad, it's like, wow, you got all this knowledge and all this information that they give to you. Knowledge. All right, here's the next one. You'll get this one pretty quick. Who's this? Right. And what do they represent? Yeah. No, they represent joy, right? The Happy Meal. When you eat the Happy Meal, I'm so happy when I eat the Happy Meal, right? Yeah, Ronald McDonald, right? So pleasure, right? Pleasure, happiness, pleasure. All right, I think there's one more. Who's that? Mercedes-Benz. I showed this to Rachel, and she said, is that the peace sign? I don't think so. If you drove a Mercedes, maybe you got peace. I don't know. No, but it's actually a three-point star, and the story was maybe like 100 years ago that the motor of a Mercedes-Benz would operate on land, and it would operate in the air, and it would operate in the sea. And so you got this three-point star, but it's like it represents power. Right? If you drive a Mercedes, you got power. And companies will pay millions, tens of millions of dollars for people to sit around and develop these things to try to make them as positive and try to make them as fun and try to make them as memorable, compelling as possible. And the goal is to get people to say, I want that. Right? I want that. I want whatever that company is selling. I want a piece of that. I want success. I want knowledge. I want power. I want pleasure. I want all of that. I want that. And we obviously know the most successful ones. But then I think about Christianity, and y'all just stick with me here for just a minute. I think about Christianity, and there's one symbol, one logo across time. You see it everywhere you go. You see it every day. You see it multiple times every day. You see it on T-shirts. You see it on bumper stickers. You see it on cars. People get it tattooed on their bodies. I may or may not have done that. My life was fuzzy at 18. But you just see it all the time, right? And what is that? What's that? What's the next slide? What is that? We got it? Yeah. The cross, right? The cross. And, because it's become so common, you really can't go anywhere. In fact, I challenge you, try to go a day this week without seeing a cross. I bet you don't do it. You see it all the time. It's like almost like a piece of just like jewelry or art or something. It doesn't mean anything. But what does that mean? What does the cross mean? What does it mean? Yeah, it means a bunch of stuff. Can I tell you what it initially meant? It initially meant execution for whoever was on that thing, right? It was meant to kill people, and the Persians actually kind of invented it. And then Alexander the Great came along, and he really made it popular. But the Romans, oh man, they perfected it. And they perfected it to the point to really deter any kind of rebellion, right? I mean, you're the Roman Empire. Nobody's going to rebel against us. And if you do, we'll put you on a cross. Right? We'll put you on a cross. And it was certainly fatal, but it was much more than that. It was to humiliate you. It was to be very painful. We get the word excruciating from the Latin word from crucifixion. Crucifixion. This is what Jesus would say in his life. He would say in Matthew 16, he said, "Whoever would come after me must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me." Now you think about how strange that is, right? Because in the beginning, this little movement called Christianity was trying to attract people, right? And people were dying. They were saying, I saw Jesus, I saw him alive, I believe it, I saw it, I saw it, I saw it. And the Roman Empire was like, you better not say anything about Jesus anymore, I'm going to kill you. And they said, I just can't stop talking about it. And they were trying to grow followers. They were trying to grow followers. They were trying to attract people to their group to become part of their cause. And the symbol that they used to represent that message was not an icon of success or knowledge or pleasure or power, any of that stuff. It was like the symbol universally understood to represent scandal and failure and death, right? They chose a cross. What company, like if you think in today's time, what company, who would choose a means of execution as their company logo? I mean, imagine Georgia Power hiring a marketing consultant, and this guy advises them that they should use an electric chair as their logo with a little catchy phrase that says, "The power is on." That'd be dumb, wouldn't it? That'd be like the dumbest thing ever. Like I wouldn't want to use Georgia Power for nothing. That'd be dumb. It'd be dumb. And when Jesus invited his followers to take up their cross, y'all, it wasn't like this is a call to give up and die. That's not what Jesus was saying, although we look at the cross and we think execution, but that's not what Jesus was saying. It was a call to be a part of something that would change the world. It was a call to do something that ordinary people never thought possible. Never thought possible, that men and women were offered a cause worth living for, worth dying for. One day they believed to be resurrected for. That God was doing a new thing in this world, and all that sin and death and guilt and evil, that wasn't invited to this party. And so now, 2,000 years later, you and I, we get to be part of the same thing, right? We get to be, we've got something to live for, and we've got something to die for. One day to be resurrected for. And it's more than success, and it's more than pleasure and power, and what all the logos tell us is that we have to have. It's actually more than that. It's actually more than that. We got the power to change the world. That's good news. Good news. You say, that's awesome, Ethan. That's great. How do we tap into that? What does that look like? How does that work? And that's really what I want to spend our time today talking about. And I think you're going to learn some cool things. Maybe some of it's new, maybe some of it's not. But how do we tap into that? And that's what I want to talk about. If you got an outline, write it down. These aren't new. These are just some ideas that I think will help you. So how do I tap into the power of the cross? Well, really the first thing, and probably the hardest thing that I can do, is I can ask God for a burden. I can ask God for a burden. If I were to be honest with you, most of the time I just want my life to kind of be easygoing, right? I don't want a lot of problems. I kind of like things a certain way. I want things done really a certain way. I just don't want any problems. I got a 1.5-year-old. It'd be awesome if he never, fell down, if he never had to cry. Like when I come home, I want a steak and something cold to drink every day. Isn't that pretty much? No, I'm just playing. I definitely don't do that. No, but I like things a certain way, right? But the truth is that's like death. That's death by boredom. That is a boring way to live. And I honestly believe that solving problems, when we have problems and we overcome them, when we overcome adversity, that we are becoming the person that God wants us to be. That every problem is an invitation to say yes to God. Y'all might want to write that down. Let me say it again. Every problem is an invitation to say yes to God. So when we talk to God and I ask Him, I ask Him for the dumbest stuff sometimes. Like, who cares? When I think back, when I pray to God. Like, don't ask for comfort. Like when I read the stories of the Bible and the Scripture, it's like God's not real concerned about that. He don't really care about comfort. Don't ask for ease. Don't ask for manageability. Don't ask for that. Ask for a challenge. Have you ever done that? I mean, like a challenge bigger than yourself, bigger than maybe even the church. That's something that helps the community. I love John Ortberg. I got a lot of material that I'm using today from him. He's one of my favorite pastors. He says this on the screen. He says, there can be no learning without novelty. There can be no novelty without risk. We cannot grow unless there has been a challenge to what is familiar and comfortable. I believe that. I believe that. There's a guy I know, he decided to change his name. Actually, just wanted to change his middle name, and he changed it to Danger. Seriously. He changed his middle name to Danger because he's just always been kind of a compliant guy, middle-of-the-road kind of guy, and so he's just kind of staking a new claim for his life, and so his middle name's Danger. But that actually takes a lot of paperwork, a lot of legal work, and this guy had to go to court multiple times. And on the last day he was scheduled to go to court, he was last on the docket to see the judge. And there were two guys in front of him that were suing each other. And they got so heated that the two guys had to be escorted out of the courtroom. And but anyways, everything went fine. It went along as scheduled, and the judge granted him, granted his request to have his middle name changed. And so the guy was walking out of the courtroom, and the bailiff stopped him, and he said, those two guys who were arguing with each other, they're actually fighting out in the parking lot, and just be careful, it's dangerous out there. And I mean, like in a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, he handed the bailiff those papers, and he said, it's okay, Danger's my middle name. I thought, you got to be kidding me, man, are you seriously? And he said, yeah. He said, Danger's my middle name, that's cool, that's all right. And I think about us, I think about my life, and I think, it's when I read the Scriptures, and I just hear people's stories, I think about Sherry. Y'all, the Spirit of God wants to make us dangerous. I mean, what she did with the kids, y'all, nobody else is doing. Nobody else is doing with 20 or 30 inner city kids in Atlanta, you know what I mean? And she did it because she just believed her life counted and her life mattered, and the Spirit was going to use her, and the Spirit did use her. Because the Spirit makes us dangerous, and the Spirit makes us threatening to things like boredom, and it makes us threatening to things like complacency, and it makes us threatening to this life that maybe we just keep, we wake up every day, we go to work, we pay the bills, we take care of the kids, and it just kind of get in this routine. The Spirit of God says no to that, and it says yes to a challenge for each and every one of us. And it's available for us. It's available for us. We can ask for it. I challenge you to do that this week. Ask for it. Ask for it. Ask for it. Second thing is this. Write this down. Find my challenge. How do I tap into the power of the cross? I got to find a challenge. Okay. Think with me through this. There's a story in the Bible about a man named Caleb. Y'all familiar with his story? Caleb was one of 12 scouts sent to explore the Promised Land when Israel had left Egypt. They'd been in Egypt for like 400 years, and now they're going to the Promised Land. They're led by Moses, and they get there, and they see that there's people that are living there. And so they sent 12 spies, 12 scouts to go check it out. And two of the men were named Caleb and Joshua, right? So you get the picture, 12 guys are going to check it out. Well, 10 of them come back, and they say, there's no way we're going to take this land. Like, we're better off if we go back to Egypt and become slaves. 10 of them said that. But Joshua and Caleb, they both trusted in God, and they just said, you know what, we can do it. We can do it. We can do it. And because of Israel's unbelief, Caleb, he had to spend 40 years of his life just wandering through the wilderness. And by the time they crossed over the Jordan, when they would get there, Caleb was 85 years old. Think about it, old man, 85 years old. And then there was another 5 years before the various tribes of Israel were given their land. So he was a really old guy at this point. And this is what Caleb says. Just read these with me. He says, I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land, and I brought him back a report according to my convictions. But my fellow Israelites who went up with me made the hearts of the people melt in fear. But I, however, I followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. It's a good attitude. If you have a negative attitude and a small faith when you're 40, there's a good chance that you won't have a negative attitude and a small faith when you're 85, because there's a good chance that you won't ever make it to 85. And it's interesting, psychologists, I'm serious, psychologists have done studies on groups of people who are faith-filled and who generally have a good attitude, and they have done studies on groups of people who have generally a negative attitude, and 90% of the people who are faith-filled are alive at the age of 85. And only 34% of the people who live with negative attitudes are alive at the age of 85. So your attitude matters. Your attitude matters. That you could actually live a decade longer if you got a good attitude. Are you happy about that? If you're not, you better be careful, because you might be dying. You might die. So 12 spies, right? 12 spies, they went out. They went out. And only Joshua and Caleb, they said, you know what, we can do this, we can do it. And the other 10 said, forget about it, forget about it. And 45 years later, Caleb was as feisty as ever. And you want to guess what happened to the other 10? Well, they died. They died. They didn't make it to 85. There's a true story. In fact, I encourage you to look this lady up. Maybe write her name down. Her name's Evelyn Brand. And you probably don't know about her, but you can read about her on the internet. And it's a true story. And when she was a young woman, she felt called by God to go to India. That's her, up on the screen. She felt called by God to go to India. And as a single woman in 1909, you know, a calling like that requires all kinds of faith, all kinds of faith. But she accepted the calling, and then she would eventually be married to a young man named Jesse, and they began their ministry in rural India, bringing education and medical supplies and building roads, because the poor were really isolated, and they wanted to build roads so that they wouldn't be isolated anymore. And you know, do we have her picture back up? It took them nearly like 7 years to win their first convert for Jesus. That's a long time. But when they did, it was a big deal for her and her husband, and then that was kind of the beginnings. And over the next 20 years, they would continue to have a productive ministry. And one day, her husband sadly passed. Jesse died. And Evelyn, by this time, she was about 50 years old, and everyone expected her to return home. So you get the picture. She's lived in India for 20-something years. Her husband passes, and everybody expects her to come home to England. But she didn't go. She was just kind of feisty. She was a feisty lady. She was feisty like Caleb. And she was known and she was loved for miles around the rural part of India, and her name was Granny Brand. That's what everybody called her, Granny Brand. And she would stay there another 20 years until she was 70 under the mission board that she had served so faithfully for 20 more years. In fact, this is not on the screen, but this is what was said of her. Her son actually said this. He said, "This is how to grow old. Allow everything else to fall away until those around you see only love." I thought that's a beautiful way to have a life described. That's awesome. We're going to finish her story later, but I just think, what a life. What a life. What a life. A single woman, 1909, to accept the challenge to go to India. Now look, those of you, I know that some of you are facing debilitating illness, debilitating sickness, or maybe you have a spouse who is, or maybe you have a family member who is, or maybe you are grieving the loss of a loved one. Certainly we all here can understand that. Some of you are facing cutbacks at work. Some of you don't know where the next paycheck is coming from. Some of you are dealing with so much on your plate, and I get it. I get it. I get it. But I believe more than anything else that there are people here who might be at the point where they need to ask God for a challenge in their life to stretch them emotionally and mentally and physically. All of the above. You are at that point to ask God for a challenge. Who's going to ask that? Will it be you? Will it be you? You can do that. You can do that. Evelyn Brand, she found a challenge. She accepted it. You can too, I believe it. Ask for it. Write this down. How do we tap into the power of the cross? Yeah, we ask God for a burden. There's challenges out there that we need to stretch ourselves with. Do something difficult. Do something difficult. we're doing a little study. I didn't mean to say this, but I just felt like I need to. We're doing a small group study at our church, and we're going through a book. It's a great book that's called "I Was Broke, Now I'm Not," and it really helps us think of the way that we use our money. And one of the activities it gave us last week, and by the way, if you're not in one, please, I'm going to be right here after the service. You want to get hooked up? We're about halfway done, but it's easy, a short book. You can catch up. We can get you in a group, so come see me after the service. But one of the activities that it asked you to do last week was to write down your hopes and write down your dreams. And so Rachel and I, one day last week, we just sat down. We hadn't done it maybe it might have been before we were married. I don't remember. But we just wrote down our hopes and our dreams for our family. We wrote it down on paper. And we said, what is it going to take for this to become a reality? What are we going to have to do with our lives? And to me, it made it a possibility. It made it real that, there are things out there that we all dream about. There is a burden on your heart that you dream about, that you would love to be a part of. What's it going to take? What is it going to take? Because maybe that is your challenge. Maybe that's your challenge. And I think it's powerful when we see it in front of us, and we can take hold of it. But back to Caleb. All right, so do something difficult. Back to Caleb. Y'all remember Caleb? He was one of the spies. He was a determined guy, and his challenge, really, that he accepted was really a gift to God. It was also God's gift to him. It kind of all worked together, but he was just a determined guy. And this is what he said. Caleb said this, Joshua chapter 14, verse 10. He says, "Now, as you can see, the Lord has kept me alive and well, as he promised, for all these 45 years since Moses made this promise, even while Israel wandered in the wilderness. Today, I am 85 years old. I am as strong now as I was when Moses sent me on that journey. And I can still travel, and I can still fight as well as I could then. So give me the mountain. Give me the mountain that the Lord promised me. You will remember that as scouts we found the descendants of Anak living there in great walled towns, but if the Lord is with me, I will drive them out of the land just as the Lord said. Give me the mountain." When you battle mountains, they're harder to occupy than if you just live on flatlands. That's tough to go into the mountains. But that's exactly what Caleb asked for. He just said the hardest challenge, he'll do it. And y'all catch this? He said he had to face the Anakites. And like the Anakites, they were like Israel's most hated and formidable enemy. In fact, this is what it says in Numbers chapter 13 about the Anakites. It says, "We even saw giants there." They were the descendants of Anak. Next to them, we felt like grasshoppers. And that's what they thought too. Right into the challenge. And Caleb was 85 years old imagine, you kind of get at the end of your life, and I would want kind of retire, right? Something nice and something easy. But Caleb still wanted the privilege of a really, really hard assignment. I believe that God has wired all of us so that our bodies and our minds and our spirits, they require challenge. They require challenge, and we flourish when we face challenges for a cause that's greater than ourselves. Or that we tap into the power of the cross when we focus ourselves on challenges that make our community better, where we're not so preoccupied with ourselves. Like, get over yourself. Every day, I got to get over myself. And it's interesting when I think of the story of Joshua and Caleb. Joshua is the one who would kind of become the leader of Israel, kind of become the general of Israel. He would get the book of the Bible named after him. And Caleb could have pouted over that, but he just had an enthusiasm about life, and he just kept growing and growing, and he became a mentor, and he became a cheerleader for this totally new generation of Israelites. And he did it to such an extent that they all wanted this 85-year-old guy to lead them into the mountains. Now, life is not about comfort. It's not about comfort. It is about saying, "God, give me another mountain." And maybe yours will look like Evelyn Brand one day. Maybe you'll travel and tell the world about Jesus. Maybe that's what it looks like. Or maybe yours will look like Caleb. Or maybe your story will get told. Or maybe your story won't get told. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if the only people who know about your story are you and God. You can say, "God, give me the mountain. Give me the mountain." Dreaming big, becoming the person that God wants us to be. Y'all, that's not like one pursuit among many in our lives. No, that is the reason you and I were born. And it is worth wanting, I believe, above all else. Give me the mountain. Give me the mountain. Write this down. How do we tap into the power of the cross? Well, I need to know what my mountain is. I need to know what that is. That's great, man. That's great. It's a great story of Caleb. Give me the mountain. I believe it. What's that mean? What's that mean? Well, you know, there's not a formula. I know your mountain probably doesn't look like my mountain. Probably doesn't. Probably doesn't. But I think this. Go check this slide out. Is it the next one, Bert? The graph. Did I throw a graph in there? Did I not do that? All right, that's okay. I think you can recognize where your mountain is because I think there's an intersection. I think there's an intersection of your greatest strengths, whatever strengths you have, and then whatever the deepest needs are. Whatever the deepest needs are for maybe whatever your burden is or whatever your passions are. And I believe somewhere in our lives those cross, right? I'm inept in a lot of different ways, but I think God has given me strength in some ways. Like if you want something built or if you want something fixed, don't ever call me because I'm going to tell you to call somebody else. Right? Don't do that. But some of you guys are incredible with tools. And maybe you love it when you look, you can work on something and at the end of the day you can look back and say, man, I made that or I fixed that. That's awesome. That's awesome. That's a strength that you have. And then maybe there's this passion where maybe single moms have a broke down car. And you say, you know what, I bet I can fix that car. That's something that I love. And then maybe you start something, maybe a ministry, where you go and you fix single moms' broke down cars. That's awesome. That's knowing what your mountain is. But your mountain's different than my mountain. Different than my mountain. Strengths, needs, and passions, it all intersects in there somewhere. All right, can I finish the story of Evelyn Brand? Can I do that? Toward the end of her life, everyone called her Granny Brand. That's it, Granny Brand. And she spent her life, obviously, in India, and she had been widowed for 20 years. And at the age of 75, she received word from her home mission office in England that they weren't going to give her another 5-year extension, five-year term to stay there. Because they felt she was just too old. In fact, they even threw her a party, but she was so stubborn. She said, I'm staying in India. I'm staying in India. And unbeknownst to the mission, she had actually had a little shack built with some resources that she had smuggled into the country. And then, get this, 75-year-old, she bought a pony to get around the mountains. And this 75-year-old lady would ride from village to village to tell people about Jesus. And one day she fell off the pony and broke her hip. And her son was a prominent doctor. And, he said, Mom, it's time. It's time. Come on home. Come on home. And she looked at her son and she said, I love you, son, but I'm staying in India. I'm staying in India. God, give me the mountain. And she would spend another 18 years traveling from village to village on horseback. To the age of 93, this woman would get on a pony and she would travel from village to village to tell people about Jesus. And finally, when she was 93, she couldn't ride horseback anymore. And so the men in the villages that she would travel to, they loved her. They loved Granny Brand so much that they put her on a stretcher and they carried her from village to village so that she could tell people about Jesus. Can you imagine that? She did that for 2 years on a stretcher. That's awesome. And she would die, but she never retired. She just kind of graduated. She just graduated. And if Granny Brand had a logo, it would not point towards success. It wouldn't point towards knowledge. It wouldn't point towards power. It wouldn't point towards pleasure. Her logo would be a stretcher where she was carried up and down the mountains to pour out God's love. And I think, what a remarkable logo. I'm glad we got to learn about her today and her story, and I think it's a great story. But you know what the truth is? The truth is that her life is just a small part of a larger and more wonderful vision that I think we see at the beginning of John's Gospel, A couple verses in John's Gospel say this, and stick with me. It says this, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And the Word, Jesus, was God. And then later on it would say this, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Word, Word. You know what we translate as word, it's actually a Greek word called logos, which is where we get the word logo. Logo. Jesus is God's logo. And it is if God has said, you know what, I want my nature, I want my character, I want my representation, I want my will, I want everything about me, I want my symbol, I want it to be wrapped up in one expression, and it's Jesus. He is it. He's it. And if you want to know what a life can look like when it taps into the reservoirs of God's power and His love, we look at Jesus. And y'all, at the end of the day, this church, we don't have a program, we don't have a plan, we don't have a platform, we definitely don't have a product to help the world. We have Jesus, and we don't point towards success, we don't point towards knowledge or getting smarter or pleasure or power or any of that stuff. We point to a cross. We point to a cross. And y'all, I just believe there are amazing, amazing possibilities for us to become exactly the people that God wanted us to be. And it's tough, yeah. Is it easy? No, it's not easy. We ask God for burdens that burden our hearts when we see children. There's a lady in our group, she says, I love to cook. I want that to be my life's mission. I just want to invite people into my home so I can cook for them. What an awesome mission in life. What an awesome burden in life. But it's a challenge. It's a challenge because she understands, I know that costs money. I know it costs money, but I just believe that God is going to let me do this. He's going to fulfill this for me. And she is hell-bent. She's hell-bent on making this a reality for her life because she's accepting the challenge. She's accepting the challenge. God, give me the mountain. God, give me the mountain. What's your life going to be like? What's your life about? I mean, is it about pleasure? Is it about having the best stuff? Is it about success, power? Is it about that? Or is it about making the world, your world, the people around you, better? We can do that. God, give me the mountain. Would you bow your heads and would you pray with me? God, what a humbling truth. God, that every one of us will face, God. And I know it's so funny. You give us gifts in different ways, and you use us in different ways, and you put different people in our lives in different ways, and you do it in a way where we can use the gifts that you've given us. And you give us burdens of things that we're passionate about. And you help us, and if we're not there, God, you help us along the way. You help us find that. To be a part of something bigger and grander and more wonderful, to be a part of your kingdom, where there's no more crying, and there's no more death, and there's no more pain, and there's no more suffering in your kingdom, because they can't exist in your kingdom. They can't live in your kingdom. And we get to build it. And we get to build it in all sorts of different ways, God. God, I pray for this church. I pray for the people here who are still searching for what they were put on this earth to do. And God, I pray that you will show them, you will help them, you will guide them to know that this life, that their life can matter, because it does matter. And they can believe it, and they can grab hold of it, and their lives can be different. I thank you for the example of your son, Jesus, who he also had a mountain too. God, and his was called Calvary, but he said, give it to me. Give it to me. And on a splintered cross, the price, God, that had to be paid, he paid it. He paid it. He paid it. Thank you for his life. Thank you for his example, God, and ultimately, thank you for his power. The power that raised him from the dead. We can tap into that. We can tap into that. We love you so much. Be with us this week. Praise things in Jesus' name. Amen.